So welcome to the AecHive podcast. I'm Ralph Montague. I'm a director at ArcDocs and one of the co-founders of AecHive. I'm joined by John Egan, who's the other co-founder. John, do you want to say hi and just a quick introduction about yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is John Egan. I'm director at BIM Launcher and co-founder at AecHive, and I'm delighted to be here today. Looking forward to talking about innovation from the perspective of an actual startup building technology in the construction industry.
Very good. Thank you. So today we have a fantastic guest with us, a real rock star, I would say, in the AEC sector, Paul Doherty from the DigitGroup. Paul, you've had a fantastic career from architecture, software, into designing and planning new cities, major interventions in cities around the world, and you're a musician on top of all that. Do you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself before we get into the discussion about innovation in the AEC sector?
Well, thanks for the invitation, both John and Ralph. And Ralph, your 20 pounds is in the mail for that wonderful introduction. Thank you. I'm Paul. I'm an architect, not a software architect, a real one. I can get sued. I've been a builder, done a lot of wonderful work over the careers. And through doing real practical pulling buildings up out of the ground, I needed new tools to try and do that. So I was pulled into a brand new startup back in the late 90s called Charles River Software, where I became a consultant to this brand new thing called Parametric CAD. We renamed it BIM. Renamed our company Revit, and Autodesk bought us. I was part of the group that brought BIM to the market. In parallel to that, I was working on an online collaborative system where you could find building products and projects and people in your local area called Buzzsaw, which was supposed to be this online group. It's now been taken over by this thing called 360. But it still has a lot of the roots back into what we sold Autodesk with Buzzsaw. And then right after that, I followed the spectrum of how buildings go through a life cycle, and I got heavily involved with the facility management world, where we created a product called Tririgo, which we sold to IBM, which is now one of their flagship products. So we had very good success in setting up, software and tools for the industry, thinking that we were quote unquote disrupting it. I liked the fact that we were disrupting it from the standpoint that we knew what we were doing. We had experience of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of construction coming up out of the ground. We know where the bodies are buried. We know where the lessons learned were. We know what best practices were. And that's when we can disrupt. And that's going to be a point of, what is disruption and what is innovative and what's not, as we move forward. But knowing that, we discovered a technology after the IBM acquisition that was based upon a brand new system called Google Earth. It was originally a company called Keyhole, and one of my friends in Silicon Valley, Remy Arnaud, was part of that group when they were acquired by Google. But he was always very frustrated with how Google Earth worked. Number one, it was free, so all architects loved it, because what's not to like with free? And especially when you're dealing with, hand grenades and shoehorns, right? Meaning that as long as you're close, it's okay. It didn't need to be perfect. We did not need GIS at that time, right? We just needed to know it was in the neighborhood. It kind of looked like it belonged there, and voila. Well, Remy was very upset in how the lack of innovation, especially as technology started to mature, where even to this day, Google continues to create images and then expects you to add the data to the image instead of the other way around, where data now can generate geometry and images. So we did that back in 2013, where we created our own gaming engine in order to pull things like BIM files and CAD files and other things like that, Esri shape files. And we created our own universe that could actually take a look at an individual building, an entire system like horizontal construction, like let's say like a roadway, entire neighborhoods and entire cities. And that's what got us really thinking, well, this is an amazing product because it's better than Google Earth, but are we going to create yet another tool where the industry takes it and it just doesn't allow that needle to rise to the way that we thought people would adopt it, or they start using the product in ways that it was never intended, like Revit as a design tool. Whoever thought of that? It's not a design tool. It was never meant to be a design tool. So taking all that into case, 2013, we made the decision not to sell this product out to the market, that we were going to use it internally and actually eat our own dog food. and use our professional standing as architects, engineers, contractors, and operators, and create an organization that would develop what was then termed smart cities. It's been an awesome ride so far because we've gone from master planning to actually having, bulldozers and diggers dig into the ground, and they're pulling up these ideas up out of the ground. I think that's, Ralph and John, one of the things that I think that sometimes we need to level set ourselves with is that, one of the great things about what you're bringing to market, not just for the Irish market, but globally through AecHive, is the wonderment of how an idea in someone's mind can become something that people live, breathe, work, and learn in. Right? I mean, just think about that, right? And the amount of convincing and the amount of ways of making changes on the fly in order to get that thing going. And that's just one build. What an amazing industry we're in. I mean, he's selling like used cars, right? And it's probably an easier way of making money. What a great time, number one, we're in, right? Thankfully, thank God for Brexit. Your Irish construction market is off the charts. I mean, I never thought as an Irishman I'd thank the English, but thank you. What a gift. And then you take a look, across the pond at what's happening over here in the U.S. I have never seen an economy like this. And all the fundamentals are in place for still a long run. So, there's this thing about innovation and disruption and our industry is when is the right time to start to implement change? Is it on a specific project and then trying to get other multi-enterprise workflows to work together at different times during a project? You have good luck with that, right? That's changing tires 100 miles an hour. Or you do it internally. But then are you future shocking people like, wow, those guys are talking, some sort of language I don't understand. I got to get a building up out of the ground, right? BIM has to still today create 2D drawings, right? Because we still have to communicate with the past. So the greatest challenge that AecHive as a community has is you have to have one foot in the past and one foot in the future. And you hope that you're not going to have too much of a gap because then you're going to be stretched out like a ballerina, right? And you've seen my body shape. That would never work.
Well, I mean, so anybody who's not shell-shocked at this point in the conversation about all the amazing things you're doing is obviously not paying attention. But I see we're joined by Patrick, your colleague. Pat, do you want to join the conversation?
I usually let Paul get at least the first 20 minutes in, then he needs to breathe.
Yeah. But I think you could add a lot as well because you've been involved sort of on the, let's say, the commercialization side and acquisitions and, of a number of innovation projects. And, I think that's a really important thing for people like John, who are startups who are looking to develop new products, new ideas, new better ways of doing things, trying to sort of map out the journey of how do I get a new idea to market? How do I get people interested in it? One of the challenges of innovation, I mean, there were so many points there, Paul, that my head's spinning now. But one of the things is I seem to think innovation slows down when the market is busy. And innovation in construction or the AEC sector is pretty low anyway. So it's not a sort of highly, there's a lot of innovation happening, but it happens at the project level. It doesn't happen sort of across projects and across sectors. And
well, this is the irony of our industry globally. It has nothing to do with the U.S. market, Irish market, or elsewhere. We are in a business model where when times are bad, we don't have the resources to do proper R&D. When times are good, we don't have the time. So that's the irony of all this, which is why are you going to make a change and who's it going to benefit? When we started the AEC Hackathon, I think one of the great themes that came out of it as we started it, which is now in its 7th year, which is kind of cool. The first two were held at Facebook headquarters, which was a great collision of industries, the IT industry and the real estate industry, come together in the Facebook hack room in Mountain View. It was just fantastic. And what came out of it was a couple of lessons learned. One is just because you can, should you? Meaning that there are a lot of folks out there that are very hungry to change things. But what we learned from the Facebook engineers was there were a lot of veterans there. It just wasn't like kids coming up with a quick idea and they know how to code. There's a lot of money over the past 4 or 5 years inside property tech, prop tech, construct tech, this idea that even some designers may be looking at things like generative design and all these really, really cool ideas. And there's a lot of money being thrown at some of these things that as if they're businesses. But when you take a look at what really drives, adoption and that type of thing, is you better have some experience behind you of swinging a hammer, digging the dirt, designing something before you start to disrupt it. You can't disrupt something if you don't understand the existing process. Otherwise, you're a solution looking for a problem. And then I start seeing the marketing people get behind that dilemma. And we start terms like digital twin. What the F is that? Because now you've just thrown a big elephant into the room, and I'm going to call a digital twin this, and I'm going to call a digital twin that, and all of a sudden it gets into the lexicon where on contracts from customers, they're saying, and as a deliverable, we want a digital twin. What? That's like saying, like, I want BIM at the end of the project. Well, describe it. What does it mean? So what we're doing as owners now, when we hire architects and engineers and contractors and suggest materials and performance specifications and equipment, appliances and things like that, is we're very careful about what we're requiring. And part of that is we could go deep into the weeds. And, I see the work that AecHive does, and Ralph, you in particular, which I admire, is taking a look at what other industries use as a language, ISO, ANSI, of America, these types of standardization groups. But what we're seeing is that's going to take some time. It needs time to mature, to not only be described and redescribed, but then mature to being part of the process so that it becomes transparent to the process and it's just work gets done. What we're finding is that classifications of what we want work a little better as the near-term objective. It's not, it will become long-term. But when we say, listen, we want things done for design and construction in the U.S. classification nomenclature called master format, I know I'm getting 16 divisions of information. I know that division 8 is doors and windows, division 9 is finishes, division 3 is concrete. And guess what? Up and down the value chain of how we deliver projects in the U.S., I'm talking the same language to the local lumberyard, to the executive stakeholder, to the guy in the bank with the construction loan, all the way to the prime designers. We're all talking the same language. Now, what gets interesting is if you follow the life cycle of that building and you start thinking of assets, both the physical asset and then the corresponding digital asset, there are certain performance indicators and classifications that will pivot and allow that same data, that digital DNA that everyone in the AC industry creates but doesn't understand their value, that digital DNA, there's going to be certain pieces of that information that's going to be important to a facility manager or an operator of those buildings. That's called uniformat in the U.S. There's uniclass and all sorts of things over in Europe, which are really, really important. I wish more people would focus in on the importance of that. And I'm not talking about, Kobe spreadsheets. I'm talking about the importance of the pivot of a digital DNA of the built environment, and how when it pivots, there's going to be certain information that drops off and other pieces of information that rise in contextual value as you start getting into operations.
So you're organizing and when you're digitizing.
Correct. Which means that all we ask as owners is we want data in this classification system. If you use an Excel spreadsheet to do that, but it's in that classification system, God bless you. If it's a Revit model, God bless you. I don't want to know how you're making your sausages. I'm ordering what sausage I want.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a huge thing that we need to get over. Now, let's think about the complexity now of taking not just one building, but how about a neighborhood or a district of a city, or in the case of what we do from a greenfield, a complete city. We need to also have another pivot table that then reclassifies what happens when you start to aggregate that type of information, such as how many schools within these square kilometers, how many hospitals, how many homes, single-family homes, multifamily homes, blah, 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 and what do I do with that information to operate a city now that's digitized?
And every door in the city has the same classification.
But here's a problem, and this is a real-life situation. We were pulling a building up out of the ground in a healthcare facility, and someone decided to put a element of a family, which I hate the term family, how that became part of our nomenclature. I'd love to shoot the person that did that. It's assembly. It's a freaking assembly, okay? And in that wall, there is a door, and that door has a certain swing. But to save time, you have some sort of CAD jockey, BIM jockey, whatever they're calling themselves today, and they just put a placeholder. Why? Because they're going to come back to it. Guess what? They never went back to it. So we got this great model with all left swinging doors everywhere. The door table was easy. Left swinging wood door. Right? It's like, holy cow. So things may look really good, but it's like dating a mannequin. It looks good, but it has no brains.
So and that's probably a good point to bring in, because we want to talk about innovation, and there's no doubt there's some problems in the AEC sector in the way we deliver projects. Like even at the macro scale, globally we can't deliver enough schools and hospitals and infrastructure. We do it so slowly and at such great cost, not only financial cost, but great cost to the environment. And we literally something like 30% of building materials that we produce end up back in landfill at great expense to the environment. We pull materials out of the ground, we make them into products, we deliver them to site, we pay people to carry them around, and then they end up back in a skip going off to a landfill site. So it's just crazy. And that's why we need innovation, is that we've done great things. We've built fantastic things, but we can do it better. I suppose that's what we want to look at in AecHive, is how can we do things better? And why is the investment of time and money into looking at things so low? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we should embrace the absurdity of our industry. That it's warts and all, it's still magic to everyone else outside the industry about how buildings and roads and bridges and everything to do with the built environments actually gets built. It's magic. It's like, I almost wish, we have like a magician's, cloak over our buildings about how we're making our sausage. And voila, we take the top of, the cover off the building and it's there. Because that's the way it is to the people in the world. And then we have abstracts of our environment, such as like the financial world, right? I mean, they think of the built environment and look at it with such different, lenses that we're almost not talking about the same industry at times, right? Try going for a construction loan. It's absurd. But I think lying in the absurdity and embracing that becomes a very, very big strength to every one of the stakeholders that's listening in on this podcast. Because of the absurdity of what is out there, you're exactly right, Ralph, where we tend to beat ourselves up too much at times. And even with the newer stuff like BIM, I can make fun of it all the time only because, well, it's an amazing tool that has been hijacked by certain people where they make livings off of making things more complex, because at least now they have a built-in client that's going to pay forever.
Yeah.
That's the identification of something that needs to go away. And that's just in the delivery mechanism. I think what you were talking about before was spot on, where we're now talking about reimagining the craziness of taking elements up out of the earth, creating it into a form that we can use for either structural, ornamental, functional ways. And then at the end of the day, we put it back into the earth, but it's not the way that we should. I'm the farthest thing from a Birkenstock wearing, tree hugging person out there. I don't need to wear a cape for it. Just thinking through what that process is, meaning that specifying things, are you literally going for the cheapest thing possible? But, when you put into account the carbon, shipping it from the manufacturing site all the way to your job site, that you're more or less killing the environment, yet you've done a sustainable LEED building. It's absurd. That's not what happens. So if we really, really, really want to take it to the nth degree of supply chain and into, life cycle product management, I think we have a lot to learn. And we don't have all the answers, which is good, because I think through the mistakes, if we're willing to admit them, and then learn from those things, that's where best practices emerge from. because not everyone's going to want to have the courage to go out there and try something new. Some of the stuff I've seen I love the new term greenwash, where it looks all good and you got your LEED Platinum thing up in the lobby, but holy shit, the way that you are creating your operational environment, you're using more energy than you should just in the operations, which is why I like that LEED is moving from the design and construction phase into operations to actually keep your pretty plaque up there. So if those are the goals, I think that that's one step. But the art of embracing the absurdity of what we're in the middle of, I think then comes down to the contextual level of the local person and the responsibility that everyone on this phone call and the community of AecHive should take into heart. What are you doing every day to improve your role in this process? And if you can connect the dots and that role can be brought up to a community conversation, well, that's where the magic happens. Not one person has all these answers. We're too complex. To your point, the hospitals, the schools, the community centers, the homes. Every one of those is a building type that have different types of pressures and different types of challenges associated with them. But when you start having the conversations, we're not looking for a silver bullet. What we're looking for is also not one song. What we're looking for is an entire hymnal, so that we actually now have pathways that we can move forward and move the needle a little bit. These conversations aren't new, Ralph, right? We're just talking about different tools because, 60, 70 years ago in the U.S., we were talking about how many deaths could we count on in the budget line item of our budgets to carry the cost of death compensation. That was real. And then finally we got, OSHA involved. And now if you have a recordable injury, that's a big deal, let alone, deaths are almost unheard of in construction sites. They're now not the normal. They're the exception.
Yeah.
So what happens, 50 years from now, when we have the people right now that are pushing the envelope of awareness, of understanding what you're specifying may not be the best thing. It may come from the large scale manufacturer that you have trust about, but guess what? Why don't you give that local group a shot, right? And start being creative. I'm especially talking about the architects out there, right? Material science should be taught at a higher level in all education because that is the art of what we're about. It's not going into some brochure and picking out, metal studs and, drywall and, slapping up some siding. A monkey can do that. That's why we have real estate developers.
You made an interesting point earlier about BIM being hijacked, and I thought that was quite good because that's what we're seeing on projects at the moment is that designers are using BIM as a tool to produce drawings. So they're not using it as a means to create a digital version of the building. They are in the background, but the actual thing they're handing over is a set of drawings and PDFs. And then the contractors are getting those drawings, often not getting the model, and having to recreate the model. And because there's a BIM requirement, they're using they're building the model again for the purposes of constructing, but then they're printing out drawings which people on site are using to build the building. But then the building that's actually built is not reflective of the model they've built because people have made changes on site. And so, so it's just a mess if you think about it. And it all comes because people have taken a traditional process and hijacked a piece of software to do something old instead of something new. There's no digital thread that travels, from design to construction to operations.
So Ralph, let's take a field condition, right? You could have the most decorated BIM veteran, number one speaker at Autodesk University, blah, 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 on the architectural side, and does beautiful BIM. You could have an amazing GC that actually can take that particular architectural model, modify it a bit, maybe for some clash detection and stuff like that. And they are kings and wizards of that particular area of Ireland, let's say, for using BIM. Then you get out to the field, and the guy hanging the doors wants to have a drawing because that's what he knows, because he wants to get home. First of all, he wants to put his hours in. He wants to get paid. He wants to go home and watch England, Ireland this weekend. Yeah. That's what we're dealing with. And this guy doesn't care if BIM comes in a snow cone or on his iPad or on a piece of paper. So the number one piece of information that I look at as the guiding principle on every project site today are either the blueprints or the A4 size of paper that have a lot of coffee stains on it. Why? Because that's the oldest piece of information with a lot of red marks, and that's the captured information. Right now, in order to go back to the model, which then you got the BIM jockey then to have to make the change I could do for 2 seconds, hand drawing to actually solve the problem in the field at that moment in time. That's the dilemma. That's the absurdity of our business, which is great because guess what? I can now identify in that particular workflow maybe some workarounds, right? And start the process of digital communication in the appropriate deliverable. If we're thinking that everyone has to learn Revit in order to operate a project, we're kidding ourselves, right? If anything, Revit should almost be like a router that says, or actually any BIM. I'm just using Revit just because, well, it was mine. Yeah. And using that as a router to actually put out the proper types of information, I don't care if it's A4. I don't care if it's on paper. Guess what? If that's what we have to communicate today to pull buildings up out of the ground and learn from it, that the next generation may actually get that change on an iPad. And maybe it's on like a Bluebeam PDF reader. That's a good step in the right direction. Eventually, we will get to a web-based or cloud-based model that's dynamic, that operates through AI and voice control and all that other stuff. We're building towards that. But is the end?
But why is that so slow? Because if you look at, say, manufacturing, like cars and Boeings and whatever, they're not drawing a set of design intent drawings and then trying.
Oh, they're just as screwed up as we are. Come on,
yeah, they're not cobbling together a Boeing in a factory and sort of moving things around.
Can you say the 737 Max? Come on, they're absurd in their own way, right?
Yeah.
What they have down and what they do, what a lot of us don't do in our industry, is that they document process workflows. That's their secret key. And they have a controlled environment of manufacturing, which is why, we're taking a major headfirst plunge into the world of, factory-based prefabrication panels, volumetric, modular, all sorts of new types of delivery systems, because it's our age's design build. You remember when design build was like, oh, you can't do that, right? And now it's just another delivery mechanism. If it works for that project, that's great. We're looking at it that same way with the prefabrication world, the manufacturing of the industrialization of the construction industry. Is it for everyone? No. Is it the end all for everyone? No. It's just another delivery mechanism, but a very important one, because you have to have documented workflows, which give you what? Discipline, which means what? We can finally standardize. ISO in the field is going to be very difficult. ISO in a factory has to happen. We're talking black belt level 6 Sigma shit. That's where we're getting to. So, BIM's greatest asset of leaps of faith and putting benchmarks in place is in the world of prefabrication and modular, driving machines, things like CNC machines and whatnot. That's its next evolution in BIM 2.0, because it's very, very difficult to put those measures into place when you have, on a specific project, you have super users to non-users, and they're all expected to work with BIM. So that's why we say, we look at it like a router. That's its greatest asset right now, to be able to push out what those deliverables are, including hand drafting. I mean, take a picture, throw it up there. I can't wait for the first person to do like BIM Twitter per project, right? Just Twitter it up. Whoop, there you go. And all those tweets are the conversations and the digital assets that make up what that thing is. So what's the history about what that thing is? Because right now, the worst thing about BIM is that it doesn't tell you the history. It doesn't give you it doesn't give you daily reports. It doesn't give you 2-week look aheads. It doesn't give you what decisions were made, how the sausage was made. So that's why when we go into, like what you're saying, into this life cycle approach, into FM and operations, how do you build upon a weak deck of cards and expect to run a building off of that? Is the AV box exactly there? Which comes back to, Ralph, something even bigger I think AecHive as a community should take a look at, is when you're delivering things for permits and inspections and things like that, are you developing your deliverable for the permit, or are you actually doing the right thing? And it's a gut check, because sometimes you want to keep the project going. We need the permit. Yeah, just throw that in there. We're not going to do it like that. Don't worry about it. We'll fix it in the field. Right? That conversation never happens, right? We have to real gut check if we really, really want to put digitalization onto the construction process, because once you put a digital lens on any process, it shows warts and all. It's going to show you where the transparencies are for who's making money, who's not, who's cutting corners, who's not. And people don't like that. Well, guess what? That's what BIM does. So unless you want to do it the right way, which may add cost and time and everything else, maybe BIM's not for you, and good luck with your project. So I mean, that's going to be a key for how AecHive gets around the moral and ethical issues of using technology in the construction industry, is that someone's going to win, but more importantly, someone's going to lose. And the people that are going to yelp the loudest of, well, this didn't work, are the ones that are either going to be not needed anymore, technology's taken over, or they're going to lose money, or found out that they're not necessary. So just watch how this conversation happens over the next 5 to 10 years. The people that squeak the loudest are the ones that are going to lose the most.
Yeah. And I think that's happened in other sectors. You've seen the winners and the losers, and usually it's the incumbents, the people who have business models that are well established on wasteful practices that are going to lose and going to lose big. I suppose one of the things we're trying to do in AecHive is not just focus purely on technology and innovation, but also focus on people, because I think it's also fair to say there's quite a strong disconnect in the AEC sector between people. So between the disciplines, between various stakeholders, people don't understand each other. They, whether you're a real estate investor or a designer or a contractor or a guy in the field or somebody in a factory, it's as if you speak different languages and can't talk to each other. and yet somehow amongst all that, we have
I kind of call it a marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a
good
marriage or a bad marriage?
That's to be determined, right? Yeah. And it's actually in the eye of the beholder, right? Because there's certain architects that when you have the trust of a GC that where you've delivered good projects in the past, who's the first person you're going to reach out to, right? It's all about the local relationships, right? And relationships are all built on trust or mistrust. Like, I'm never going to use that plumber again. What an asshole, all that type of stuff. So, the localization of that is huge. What we learned prior to TDG, I was a corporate officer of a Fortune 500 company called Hovnanian Homes, AecHive. New York Stock Exchange listed company, $8.5 billion of revenue, 20,000 McMansions around the United States every year. And what we learned was that, and this is something AecHive should really think about, right? On a national level, we bought up local folks, either home builders, that type of thing, because they understood the relationships with building departments, zoning ordinances, this thing and that thing. And we needed that local knowledge, right? So that was huge, the experience level on the local level. The secondary level was that these local builders underneath our processes, so we were like the process managers, the process owners, we called ourselves. So we came up with processes for everything about, scheduling. We did this thing called just in time, and then we modified that to lean because lean became a hot thing. And then we turned it into a really interesting model based on the processes we learned from Boeing. And we started to document things. Everyone had to become a process documenter, which was awesome. It was a great experience to do that. And what we learned was that we could do a continuous improvement cycle that would shorten the amount of cycles it would take to pull a home up out of the ground. These homes were like, 2,500, 3,000, up to 5,000 square foot homes, 500 square meter homes, big, right? And the idea was for every day that we could save, to the bottom line, it was, over $2 million in the black. So you can imagine that's a big deal. If you can shave, 4 or 5 days off of something, that's bottom line dollars, right? And what we found was that the local contractors that we would hire, the subs, the framers, the painters, the roofers, all these guys, were really concerned about two things. It was really eye-opening. One was their position in the schedule. In other words, who was the trade before them and who was the trade after them? Because they were constantly pissed off, especially with large national organizations like us, that would come in and hire, like let's say a tile layer, right? And all of a sudden now the plumber had to come in to put the finished, commode and sink and tub in because the tile work is done, right? Or vice versa, depending on the home and the type of work task you want to put into place. But just to use that, tile to toilet finisher. The tile guy really didn't give a shit about the next trade. So what they would do is just leave it at the end of the day that they were done with their job and they'd say they got done and they get paid. The trade after them would actually spend half the morning cleaning up, which meant they wasted half a day, yet they're only being paid for putting that thing in, and now they've lost a half a day wages, right? So the idea was to create trust between the different trades, and how we did that was called even flow production, where we started a home and we finished a home every day in a community of like, let's say 50 homes. And because we would then literally take them out for beers after work and treat them to lunches and workshops and that type of thing, which sounds very soft and fluffy, but what it did was it created a relationship between people that were disconnected to finally have conversations with each other. And suddenly, because they were constantly seeing the same guys, the trade that would leave a broom swept thing behind, then the next trade would do the same for the trade after them. And that went away. Now, that's something, unless you're in the field, you have no notion that that's even an issue. Yet it's a big effing deal. The other thing going through even flow production is that it puts everyone onto a daily report time clock, which means that the 2-week look-aheads, including the float within the schedule now, can be managed better, including weather delays and this thing and that thing, which meant that there was a periodic way, like every Friday or every Thursday, that you knew you were getting paid. And guess what? I'm competing against another home builder for that local talent. I want their A team. Mm-hmm. The fight for talent all the time. And if you can pay them on time, you know you're going to get the A team as opposed to your competitors. So
what you were doing there is, I mean, you probably didn't use this term, but you were creating a community of people that could function better together.
As an organism.
Supported by innovation and technologies and better processes.
Correct.
So it was a deliberate making of a community, that would function together. That
would work beyond one project, and I think right, because in our world, if it's a large enough project, it's like the comparable of that is a motion picture, right? Where you can have Iron Man and have a great job and kick it out of the park. But guess what? In Iron Man 2, you're not going to get everyone that was on Iron Man 1. Same thing in the industry. You may have like a kick-ass team. We did BIM and we solved these problems. We were, under budget and, and we brought it in, on time and blah, 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 blah. The next project, you could have 1 week wheel and what you think was magic turns out to be absurd.
Yeah. So what I really got from that, and I think that was a fantastic example, is that concerted effort and deliberateness of creating this well-functioning organism or group of people. That it wasn't just sort of this sounds like a good idea, let's do it, but it was managed, through your workflows and your various things, with the aim of creating this community, which functioned a lot better than most crews on a site would function.
Correct. And our biggest measure at the end of the day was this thing called the J.D. Powers Quality Award. Because you can cut corners supposedly cut corners, but improve a process, let's say, and save some time. The ultimate thing is, did you keep the same quality level? And those quality awards are based upon a 3, 6, and then 12-month survey independently done by J.D. Powers here in the U.S. on people's perceptions of the quality of the home that they bought. So it was out of your hands, and the key was to keep them as happy as possible. So the idea was that we would keep, a community leader there that, if there's any punch list items, anything that would pop up within that 3-month milestone, 6-month milestone, then 1-year milestone, we bent over backwards in order to make that happen. Pretty interesting, right? Like, who does that in our industry, especially on the commercial side? Following up, 3, 6, 12 months later and be there on, no questions asked, punch listing things. Let's get it right. Which meant that we don't want a long punch list because that costs us a lot of money. So the key was, how do you balance the quality level that you still either want to maintain or increase quality while saving time and money through technology, and make technology as transparent to the process as possible? Yeah. That's a challenge as a global community. And again, when you put that self-imposed thing of quality 12 months after the handover of a building to a customer, I think that changes some of your disruptive ideas, right? Because it's no just throwing things together and running away as fast as possible. Like, hey man, you bought it. I mean, that's what we do.
Good luck with that.
Right. Yeah. Right. But what happens when you put yourself at risk? That's a challenge I have to everyone in the industry. And now specifically, in the Irish industry, I mean, I'm watching, as you know, I've been, coming to Ireland, at least once a year for my entire life, since 1965, actually. I was born late 64. And my first plane ride was to Ireland, right? My dad's from Donegal, my mom's from Meath, and I have 52 first cousins to prove that I am Irish. Hey man, the 1970s TV in Ireland, no rubbers and bad TV. What are you going to do? So, I've watched, everything through the Troubles, through the Celtic Tiger times to now this unbelievable time. And I'm watching, farmland that I remember, driving through, just literally, you knew where Dublin ended. Now, where the hell does it end? Like when Navan becomes a suburb of Dublin. Wow. Holy cow, this growth. But here's the key. We're actually looking at real estate differently, and I think this is something the Hive community could start to actually have a conversation and actually have something to say. Where you take a subdivision, and what are you doing? You're continuing on a process that hasn't really been thought through, which is where this conversation does not need just to be between the trades, the designers, and the constructors. There also needs to be a conversation with homeowner association potentially, or even more importantly, the people that are in pre-design and pre-construction, pre-project, the folks with the money, the developers that have the idea. Because when I start seeing these subdivisions, you're turning into a country of postage stamps. It's rectangles and squares. What happened when we stopped designing for the automobiles that y'all are, taking on? And the traffic's only getting worse, and more motorways are not the answer. But what happens when we start to take a look at the transportation sector intersecting itself into the real estate sector through things like autonomous vehicles, not driverless cars, but public transportation, where you do not need turn radiuses. You do not need the width of streets we have today. In certain cases, you don't need curbs. What does that look like then when you place your buildings in the optimal place for either capturing wind, solar, all the things that are important, rather than just making up a cul-de-sac and starting to chop things up in rectangles and squares and positioning the building properly and calling that location. Guess what? Someone moved our cheese. That stopped. Yeah. Because a new type of layout that's human-centric, yet data-driven, Ralph, that is the start of the new slate. Because now you're right? And those are going to be those smart communities, not because you got 5G. It's because they're laid out properly. They are walkable. They're based upon things that people from outside our industry can understand, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Those 17 goals are gold for what we do as an industry, because guess what? We're all talking now a common language. We position our buildings, sustainability, water, energy, education, healthcare. All these things are vitally important, and boy, are they important, because just take healthcare today. If we had cities designed properly, I don't think this coronavirus would have spread as much as it has. Period. And I'll go on the record for that, because we did not design it with wellness intended. Right? The idea of designing things from the beginning with sustainable development goals as the common language, along with wellness, to say, is getting in a car, or have you seen these new Segways? The Segway, which is that sort of gravity-based scooter thing. Well, they actually have a seat now. It's like this white plastic thing that sits on top of it, so that you look like those characters from WALL-E. You know how the humans like blobs? That exists. They're selling it in LA. You get all these people with these earbuds with their latte, with sunglasses on, sitting in these things, having a conversation. It's like, if there's a picture of a dickhead, that's it. But these things exist. It's like we're going to turn into blobs if we're not careful, right? So that's why we're in this really, really cool position to start to say, enough of that crap. What would happen if we really started putting in 10,000 steps that's built into the environment that we're creating, instead of just taking value of real estate by chopping up and saying, well, because you have X amount of square meters, you're going to be in this ballpark for what the value is of that home. What happens if home actually is in the context of the community, the physical community, the digital community, and the human community? I think that's going to be a huge challenge for the Hive as a community, and then outwardly having other conversations with other groups to say, hey, here's where the essence is, so that when we do have these kids that are coming up, this whole generation that knows how to code, and that's just part of their skill set, right? Outside of AEC, they just know how to code. They're coding for the right thing, not just because they're coding because they can code, right? That give them,
making games, make something real. Yeah.
Correct. Well, making games or making stupid disruptive technology that don't make any sense, looking for a problem.
Yeah. What about we spoke a little bit about process and innovation in the way we do things. There's a constant sort of talk about low productivity in construction versus other sectors, and at a simple level you could say, well, it's because we keep doing stuff twice. We do it the quick and nasty way first, and then we have to come back and fix it up later. And so you'd say, look, if you just stop doing things twice and do it once the first time, do it correctly, you could double your productivity, and therefore, you could build twice as much for the same input. And how do we look at the sort of attitude people have to doing stuff and increase their productivity?
So there's a reason.
Technology will be a part of that, I'm sure, and what the culture that you spoke about earlier of trying to get people in a sort of a community culture that understands how they impact each other will be part of that. But on the process side, what are your thoughts?
Is it any wonder that WeWork sounds like work, and that's why it failed? So this whole thing of doing it twice, 3 times, 4. Rework in the field, of course, it's a big bugaboo. We've been challenged from the time of the pyramids, right? I'm
sure they didn't build the pyramids twice, did they?
No, they had to do 3 of them because the first one was a prototype. The smaller one, then the medium one. The third one. That's the one we keep. What do we do with the other ones? So rewriting history on purpose to fit the context. But Ralph, there's no silver bullet on that one.
Yeah.
But what there is, I think, is hope and challenge. And strategy should never be based on hope, but the hope is that through leadership with certain organizations in our industry, that they start to provide examples that we can either take save as approaches or at least modify from those proper examples as we start to move forward, because we're fast moving into a very scary part of the industry. The industry is never going to go away. The same reason why architects will never go away, because someone needs someone to sue. Right? Period. And at the end of the day, when you're talking about, the delivery mechanisms and who's going to be behind it, we're looking strongly at our main competition being the high-tech companies of Silicon Valley. And here's a case in point. They have figured out that, number one, our industry in that part of the country is not up to meeting their needs. Google and Facebook in particular, who have a crap load of money and a real need that they cannot hire people to work on their campuses in the Silicon Valley towns of Mountain View, Menlo Park, and elsewhere. And they can't count on our industry to actually deliver affordable homes. And I'm not talking about like, poor people affordable housing type thing. I'm talking about affordable homes at like $500,000 a piece, right? So what they've done over the past 18 months is quietly partnered and bought, in certain cases, prefabrication plants in and around both the East Bay area and the Silicon Valley Bay area that are now producing, and they have master planned entire worker towns. In the case of Google, they purchased Moffett Field, an old abandoned Air Force base. It was actually it has one of the world's largest hangars for the Spruce Goose, Howard Hughes' immense aircraft that to this day was the largest aircraft that ever flew. It only flew about 18 inches, but it did it, right? And what they've done is that they've converted that particular hangar into being like a WeWork type of space for their employees. And they've surrounded it with a community of beautifully designed multifamily homes, all designed, built, and operated by Google. Mountain View and Menlo Park, those two communities are being totally redesigned as a downtown area and elsewhere of total community, where it's not just the prefabrication piece of it, but it's exactly what you're talking about. They are bringing in electricians, plumbers, mechanical folks, framers, all these guys that are now going to take like the Havanian model, that they're going to be working on projects for the next 3 to 5 years together as a family and a team. These are the things that we should be paying attention to, because what's going to happen after they've completed their own backyard? They're going to say, well, we're doing it better than the construction industry. Let's go out and compete. That's what we're saying. So I think this is going to come fast and furious, where we're not expecting it. It has to come from outside the industry, but we will adapt, and we will change. The thing is, do we want to start leading and be in control of our destiny? Or are we going to do what we've done for the history of the modern construction industry, along with the old, apprenticeship, meets craftsman time of way back when, where we were influenced by events outside of our industry and we just adapt? And that's the great challenge for our industry today. That's
I suppose something we're trying to tackle with AecHive, and John and I have spoken. We have different backgrounds, but John's from the software development background. I'm from the architectural and consulting background. But what we're saying, like, there's no point waiting, just see what happens and be obliterated. It's probably not a good strategy. Let's try and encourage people within the AEC sector that have the knowledge of the AEC sector to come together to think about better ways of doing things, whether those things are technology driven or process driven or culture, community driven. But let's talk about these things. And so I suppose the question, like, if you had to pick somebody, just maybe take John as an example, as a startup person in the AEC sector that has an idea or has some ideas and wants to drive those forward. I mean, you and Patrick have been involved in this process for many years of how you bring ideas to market, how you make them scale, how you get them acquired, etc. What sort of advice would you give to people out there listening to this podcast who are small but have a great idea and they want to pursue it? How do they go about it?
Let me frame up like a 30,000-foot view, and then I want to hand it off to Patrick to talk about his experience of literal startups being in his case acquired, and what those steps are, again, from a macro view. But just John, what you're doing is Don Quixote-ish, right? Where the aspirations and the ambitions are to be applauded, and I think that that's a huge big thing that you should keep in the back of your mind, that, as you move forward, with these solution sets, that will change over time, as well as you discover market needs and whatnot. The idea is not to dwell on the negative, challenges, but to look at them as positive challenges And sometimes that's really hard to do because, you may be, going down a certain way and you have this customer that, has a specific need. You're trying to get it adopted, and don't move away from that tuning fork that sets you off on this thing. There's a lot of good in our industry, a lot of good. I don't think that is embraced enough. I think that the positivity of understanding to embrace your successes and then balance that with not the arrogance that we see sometimes with early success is a huge key. It's that balance of understanding, okay, we've taken that next step, but we haven't crossed the finish line, and you may never. But just getting to the starting line, man, I just wish I could, go save as a million times of people like yourself, John, because the industry needs that. So, Pat, do you want to, talk a little bit about, your startup experience?
Yeah, my background, John, is actually where Paul and I met was in the Buzzsaw days, even a little bit before that. And it was really, you had a lot of people coming to the table with grandiose ideas. And the first thing you got to do is step back and say, what am I solving? I can't be, well, Paul hates this. You can't be the entire chocolate cake. If you want to really process and enjoy a chocolate cake, you got to break it into pieces. They have great satisfaction over time. If you sit down and try to swallow the entire chocolate cake in the first sitting, you have a very short window of pleasure followed by a long window of pain. And some of the recent experiences, actually, in some of our partners with TDG, we have one, it's a point solution that's working on solving a point problem, getting field people to do their daily reports. And the idea was, hey, let's have the system call them and see what they're doing, and have them just respond to the questions over the line, and it'll populate into their system, and then through APIs populate into, say, a project information management system. What we found, and it was funny because I went out and talked to the top 40 general contractors in the United States, and the first one I made connection with, he goes, you got to change it. I can't have a system calling my guys every day. It's like your mother calling you every day at 4:00. They'll just stop answering. And so that led to a modification. You've got to be able to modify and address that. I look at BIM Launcher and some of the things you're doing there, and I'm sure people dealing with Procore versus AecHive, there may be similarities, but there might be differences. So flexibility, but, don't try to be everything to everyone. The old adage, go out to a group of people and ask them to answer the question, what is Lotus Notes? And you'll get multiple different answers. And then ask them to make that answer in one sentence. That's really fun to watch. But at the end of the day, you've got to have focus. Don't try to be everything to everyone, and, address the pain that you found. That's kind of the simple mantra I've always followed.
And John, do you have any questions for Pat or Paul? Because I think we're getting to the hour now, so we could probably talk all day, but
I've really enjoyed speaking with you both over the last hour, and I've been taking notes like a madman here on my fourth page. I think I could write a thesis to analyze what you've said, Paul, and to summarize it. You hear about these shared pains and responding to them, but it seems to be is about responding to the shared goals of the different stakeholders involved in the process, finding that common overlap which works for everyone, and underpinning that with the reason that everyone should engage with this process. And I think it's really interesting, and I think that different people to sit back and say, hey, yeah, look, our productivity is suffering, we're doing rework, etc. But the real reason for that is that everyone is just pulling at their own, I suppose, goals as an internal organization. And if we could bring those together, have more transparency in a project, as you've illustrated, that which would be when you worked in that big construction company that you were given the example about the tradespeople. I think that, like, I've seen that pattern when I was in university. I led a team of cleaners, And, even when I'm dealing with my software teams today in BIM Launcher, to that cleaning, to hearing your story, like we had the exact same thing when we wanted to be the fastest and we wanted to have no snags. That was the goal for our team, and we worked amazingly well together. We filled in behind each other. It was an incredible operation and something that I look back on and still think, wow, yeah, we did a really good job there. So I think that startups, including myself, what we should be focusing on is the goals of the clients, because they're the highest, or the ones with all the money, it seems, or I suppose the pains of those guys. And from a strategy point of view, looking at the different stakeholder value chains that are involved in the process, and then just begin chipping away at them one problem at a time. And just to summarize then, when Patrick said, look, you can't eat the entire cake, cut that down into 1 point solution, and being realistically as a startup be looking at. And I'm not sure whether you actually got to look at my website recently, but we've just released a product called the Deep Model Checker, and that solves one problem. It checks the quality of models as they're coming from the design team to the client, and it is really challenging to be a startup founder. And I just really want to say thanks to both of you for clarifying and helping me create clarity in my own head.
And I think
thank you, John.
I could summarize Paul and Patrick, and I'll speak about rugby, because Patrick, I know you're a keen rugby player, and you've played in Ireland, and I'm sure you'll be watching Ireland and England play this weekend. But
no, you're going to see Ireland beat England this weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think the thing you learn, and you kind of spoke about that, Paul, is if the team is playing well together, everybody has a different function within the team, and they have different sets of skills and different jobs to do, whatever. But if the team is functioning well together, it's the team that wins, and they're all,
That's right.
If one person played a little bit harder for a few minutes than the next person, as long as the team is working together and functioning together. And you gave a great example, culture, people and community combined with skills and processes and ways of doing things. What do you think, Patrick? Can the AEC sector learn from rugby on how to function?
I fully agree. It's and I've heard this speech before. 15 work well as one, but 15 don't work very well if there's 15 different ideas. Yeah. And my specialty is a scrummage, and it's 8 as one moves a truck. 8 talking to each other moves nothing but air. And that's where it is here. And I've been in the startups that dealt with construction and architects, and yes, there still is, the cultural silos and getting them to work together. And that's where you have some contractors making their modifications to build their teams out. And it still comes back to that, it's got to be 15 as one. I mean, look at the game last weekend or 2 weekends ago. So Wales didn't play as 15 as one. Ireland did.
So that's what we're trying to achieve with AecHive, is trying to align people's thinking around, as you said, Paul, the absurdity of what is AEC at the moment and what potentially it could be if people started kind of working together, functioning better together, using technologies I love the example you gave, hijacking BIM, because that's exactly what we see now. People are using a very sophisticated digital tool for a very old paper-based process, which is like that's the absurdity. Well, I'd like to thank you both for input. And
I just have one last thing. It's an important one for John. Congratulations on the code checking, because I think that there needs to be more tools like that. But if you could do me one favor, if it finds more than like 5 instances of like really, really bad modeling, could it do an AR thing where it has like a booby prize or something, and it could be published up to social media saying that stuff sucks. like this is the award for worst BIM today, and just have like a ranking system or something. It would just be brilliant, because it would force people to do good BIM. And I'm half serious about that. I've got to start calling out bad BIM.
Or an electric shock through the mouse next time you open it.
That's what I was thinking. Ralph did it exactly. Ralph, I was having the same thought. Why couldn't you attach it to a taser and the project manager sits on that taser?
BIM for the rest of us.
Anyway, Paul, good. Patrick, fantastic. Really, as always, it's a pleasure to speak to you both, and it's really incredible what the DigitGroup are doing, just how far ahead you are. It's inspiring. So thanks for the inspiration, and we look forward to speaking to you both again.
Excellent. Thank you, Ralph and John.